Welcome, everybody. Hi, good morning. Welcome. It's great to see so many faces out there, and welcome to our meeting. I am Jim Payne, the NMLS Ombudsman, and I am so happy to see everybody here in San Antonio at our 2024 NMLS conference. I hope everybody's had a great week so far, and we have a lot of topics slated to talk about, and this year, a little bit different up here for the folks sitting around. There's some bright lights like a panel, and there's a little more production value. I think they're going to have some shots on the screens, so a bit different for this meeting, but we still have that kind of roundtable feel, and hopefully we can make the best of it. I think it's going to be good. I hope everybody can hear what's going on. I do want to tell everybody that the mics are on now. It's being controlled by the production staff in the back, so as you talk, they will raise and lower the volume as needed. There's no need to touch the mic buttons to turn them on and off. But before we begin, I just wanted to welcome some CSBS staff that we'll hear some updates from. We'll hear from the exam standards from Tony Vasile. We'll get an SES update from Humera Mubin, and we'll spend some time with Dave Dwyer on the NMLS program. But first, let's hear from our CSBS's new president and CEO, Brandon Milhorn. Brandon was appointed by CSBS Board of Directors as president and CEO of CSBS in December. He brings to CSBS nearly 3 decades of advocacy, policy, legal, and regulatory experience. This is his first NMLS meeting, and we're so happy to have you. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you very much, Jim. It's really an honor to be here. Honestly, I look out over this crowd just like I did yesterday in the first session, and it strikes me that this meeting of both regulators and industry really is at the core of what NMLS is about. Really is at the core of what CSBS does. And it just gets me excited about the possibilities for what we can do to support regulators and industry in making the system more efficient, the regulatory system, the supervisory system more efficient, and ultimately the financial sector more successful. So thank you all for being here. I am the most excited about this session because I get to hear your feedback on where we're headed. That directional input is so critical. Certainly in my first 60 days, but going out over the next several years, that directional feedback is so important. So really look forward to your questions, your comments, your engagement. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Next, let's hear from Tony Vasile with the exam standards work. Tony?
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate the opportunity to speak here. So I want to provide a brief update on the mortgage exam standardization work that CSBS is supporting on behalf of the state regulators. And for those in the mortgage industry who are not familiar with this work, when we refer to mortgage exam standards, we're referring to a new set of mortgage exam programs tailored to specific business activities of a licensee. So these new programs consist of uniform information and data requests. We're conducting this standardization work in support of the One Company, One Exam initiative, and so this work is really a critical component of getting that program launched and off the ground. And over the years, we've learned from several large multi-state exams that in order to have this enhanced coordination among the states and ultimately realizing reducing regulatory burden, particularly for the largest mortgage companies in the country, we really need common exam programs that are used on a consistent basis. So where is all this work happening? Back in September of 2022, the CSBS board established a mortgage exam standards working group. And this working group is led by Anya Tab at Washington DFI, and Anya's doing a tremendous job. leading a large group of state regulators in this work. We have 20 state regulators from 17 agencies conducting this work. And so this working group has been at it since all of 2023, reviewing mortgage information requests across the entire state system. So they've reviewed over 1,600 information requests in SES, and as part of that review, they've really uncovered a fair amount of overlap between state-specific information requests that are in the SES library. And so as a result of their work in this review, they've condensed those 1,600 information requests down to 270. And with those 270 standard information requests have been proposed, they've been organized into 4 mortgage exam programs, residential mortgage exam programs. So a lender program, a broker program, a servicer program, and a master servicer program. And so these proposed standards went out to regulators for comment in July of last year. And based on the results of the comment period, the working group refined those standards just a bit more. And so where we are with all of this, we finalized the standards just about 2 weeks ago and on February 1st, and we're now working to implement those standards throughout the state system. So, and that starts with implementing them in SES, but we have more work to do in terms of a broader implementation outside of SES as well. So for the regulators in the room, where you can find these standards, it's on the NMLS Regulator Resource Center under the SES tab. So I heard some people asking questions about that yesterday, so I want to make sure everyone knows where they can find it. There are a number of enhancements coming to SES to help implement the new standards, and we're supporting this implementation work. But I also want company users of SES to know when the new standards are in the system, you'll be notified as well. So without getting into all the details of what those enhancements are in SES, we are updating a number of areas in the system, particularly on the regulator side. But there is one enhancement that I want to note in particular. We are building in a filtering review process of the new state-specific requests that are coming into the system. And this is important because the way the SES library works now, a new state-specific information request can be added without reviewing what's already in the system. And so, with this future update, any agency that submits a new information request to SES, before it's automatically added to the library, the info request will be reviewed to ensure that there isn't already a similar information request in the system. We don't want to arrive back where we were with 1,600 information requests in the system. We want to keep it closer to that 270 set of standard information requests. So, just to wrap up here, we're going to communicate further our plans and process around this, but we're literally still developing these updates in SES as we speak. So more to come. We will communicate, and I'm happy to take questions now or later during open forum, whatever works.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yep, thanks, Tony.
Yeah.
We will have some time for some Q&A here in just a couple minutes, and I'll queue you up for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next, we'll hear from Humira on what's happening with SES.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. Firstly, thank you, everyone, and good morning. I'd like to go ahead and give some numbers to this group to give you an overview of what's going on in SES. So at the end of 2023, agencies conducted over 6,700 supervisory activities. So that included both exams and investigations. Agencies also conducted over 4,800 consumer complaints, the agencies that are in SES using the consumer complaints platform. Leveraged over 162 exams that were conducted by other agencies, and then outright accepted 82 exams that were conducted by other agencies. Additionally, agencies have been collaborating in the system and granted access to 1,614 supervisory activities, and that number continues to increase daily. At the end of last year, we realized through our various stakeholder engagements we conducted over 6 agency visits, and feedback from both regulators and companies that we need to come up with an updated strategy so we can really maximize the potential of SES and revolutionize supervision in this country. As such, we're going to continue our work on both the development side as well as fine-tuning our policies so SES can really be the one-stop shop for supervision. We want that SES be the preferred platform for nationwide examinations and the systems that both regulators and companies enjoy using. Additionally, SES will be the platform that will enable agencies to effectively manage both single and multi-state exams. With less resources and more opportunities to accept and leverage exams, and you heard a lot at the sessions that happened in the last few days on accepting and leveraging exams. Come March 4th, you heard from the policy side what Tony spoke to on mortgage standards. With the Washington release, both agencies and companies will see significant enhancements related to these standards on information requests. So in the agency library, Tony briefly mentioned the filtering process, the addition of the information requests related to mortgage standards. Companies will also get insight into these information requests that are related to the 4 work programs that Tony just mentioned. Agencies will also see work programs in the system, work programs that they use on their exams, but then also see what other agencies are using in terms of work programs and standards. Furthermore, we have the first set of nationwide reports that we'll put in your hands come March 4th, where you can see an overview of what other agencies are doing in the system. We're also looking to integrate SES with other supervisory platforms so that SES is truly the powerhouse of supervision. We started this initiative with integrating information from the accreditation platform. So after March 4th, agencies will see what other agencies are credited, not just on the agency records, but also on exams when they take a look at them. But of course, there's a lot more work to be done. As Tony said, we're still fine-tuning a lot of these items. We're going to take a look at standardizing the procedures next, and we really can't do that without our regulator and company partners. So my ask for you all is to continue giving us feedback. Please participate in our testing and really let us know how we can improve the system for you guys. Thank you.
Jim, if I could just amplify what Humira said, I could not be more excited about the possibilities for SES. And you will be hearing a lot from the CSBS team over the next several months about your needs. We're going to be reaching out not only to our power users in the states, but those states that we think could be the next states to onboard and become our power users. That to me is the goal. You know, one state at a time, one agency at a time, and then we will get that momentum around SES. I've sort of empowered the team to go out and get that feedback. So please engage with us. Let us understand what our challenges are so we can start building that backlog and building SES for the future. So thank you very much, Humira.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Humira. So next we'll go with on an NMLS program update from Dave Dwyer. And then we'll open the floor with some questions on these topics to the audience.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Good morning, everyone. I know I have 30 minutes set aside for this update. My goal is to actually not spend 30 minutes giving you an update and actually have some time to answer questions on my topic as well as Humira and Tony's. I want to start with some background on our current development strategy and our prioritization model. I know that many of you may have heard this before, but I want to set the stage for those of you that may not have heard about the background on where we are with NMLS. At this time last year, we were going through an extensive discovery phase to identify a new strategy for the modernization of NMLS. A key part of this new strategy was our ability to potentially partner with the current NMLS vendor, FINRA, which gave us an ability to consider an incremental change to NMLS. Working with FINRA would allow us to avoid a higher risk, big bang delivery and focus on making high value changes to the existing system over time. This development strategy drove us to focus on how to identify those impactful enhancements and guided our prioritization model. The resulting prioritization model evolved into an evaluation and scoring of known pain points using the following criteria. Would it improve user satisfaction? Would it reduce operational costs? Would it improve our data quality? Would it maximize in its reach to the maximum number of users possible? Did we have a strong confidence level that we understood the problem and potential solutions? Were there no regulatory or policy impediments? And did it focus on our obligations under the SAFE Act towards the mortgage industry? We took every known pain point that we had collected over the years and ran it through this prioritization model and scored it based on numeric values associated with the criteria I just discussed. The resulting roadmap focused on an ability to deliver as many of these high-value improvements over a 6-phase implementation. The key improvements at a high level to be delivered in those 6 phases include Phase 1 enhancements focused on improved user access, including a streamlined account entry, self-service recovery, and account consolidation for those users with multiple accounts. Additional data validations to improve data quality on individual account setup. Foundational work to create a modern design and improved navigation, as well as improved feedback and evaluation of developed and existing functionality. Also included in Phase 1 is an evaluation to determine a potential solution for enhanced user identity authentication and verification. The outcomes of this evaluation could lead to the implementation of a user identity authentication process in a future phase. Phase 2 focuses on improving the individual application workflow by establishing a guided, task-based process that will allow license-specific application requirements to be visible within NMLS. Improvements to the company workflow for those companies that manage the individual application process on behalf of their MLOs, and improvements to the company individual association process, including sponsorship, relationship, and remote work. Phase 3 will focus on improving the branch application workflow, the post-application task navigation for individuals, the agency review process for individual applications. Phase 4 will focus on improving the company application workflow and the agency review process for branch applications. Phase 5 will look at improvements to the agency review process for company applications, Federal Registry data collection and workflow, and a cascade of entity changes to associated entities. As an example, when a company license is terminated, the system would automatically cascade the change down to the associated branches. Finally, in Phase 6, we'll focus on enhanced company branch guided navigation, improvements to the company account request and review process, and agency fees and settings management being brought within NMLS. So that ends the history lesson of how we got to where we are. So let's talk about where we are in the process and when you can expect to see the actual delivery of NMLS functionality. So Phase 1 development is underway and off to a good start. Development is on schedule. Milestone delivery of actual working software is being completed. For those of you that attended our session yesterday on Phase 1, you actually got to see some of the screenshots of that Phase 1 functionality. And so we're getting actual software delivered. We're anxious to continue that process and move through Phase 1 towards delivery. One of the key items for Phase 1 is the login consolidation for users with multiple accounts. There are a variety of mechanisms that we plan to put in place that will ensure users with multiple accounts are prompted to bring their accounts together under a single consolidated NMLS profile. This consolidation is important both short-term and long-term. Short-term advantages include the obvious ones of a single login for all of the accounts. and improve navigation between those accounts. It is also foundational for future enhancements that we hope will allow you to view and navigate to tasks across all of your accounts from a single location, from that landing page that you will land on when you first establish your NMLS profile. There won't be much there at the start, but there are big plans for what we can use that landing page for in the future. So it's important, and we ask that you focus on this consolidation of accounts when the Phase 1 launch occurs. We believe the process of consolidating those accounts is going to be very straightforward and easy, and the benefits to you will be immediate and certainly long-term. One final key item to note for Phase 1 is our strong recommendation to use a personal email as your primary recovery email address. One of the key pain points noted in our discovery is a user's loss of access to their company email due to job changes. Emails associated to this new NMLS profile are for access to NMLS. This primary recovery email will also be an option for users to utilize as their login ID. Users will maintain an email option within their underlying NMLS account or accounts, and they can utilize those company email addresses for system-related notifications, which are linked to those email options within their account. We ask that companies support the use of personal email addresses for their users' NML access profile in order to reduce those future access issues. As I said, Phase 1 development is underway and on schedule. It is our intent to launch these enhancements in a single deployment in late summer of this year. Our launch window is between July and September 30th. Our goal is to launch early in this window, but also understand that we cannot launch any later than September 30th to minimize any negative impact on this year's renewal. The launch window will narrow over the next few months to a specific date that we will communicate when we have the appropriate confidence in that date. While we continue Phase 1 development, there will be ongoing stakeholder engagement and user discovery to validate the changes we are making to communicate the impact to all of our users. Users will have opportunities to see and engage with Phase 1 functionality within existing NMLS working groups, at individual and group feedback sessions, and via regular interactive options on the new NMLS mod website. The new mod website, which is csbs.org/mod, launched on February 5th and is designed to be the hub for NMLS improvements for all of our users. From that site, users will be able to view the ongoing development status, see demos of developed functionality, provide general and specific feedback, view communication targeted to support functionality launches, and read detailed release notes. Our goal is to keep this site fresh and interactive so that users feel updated and informed. And I will note that we have had NMLS mod websites before, and that everyone says when they launch a new website that we're going to keep it fresh and interactive so you'll come back. It is sincerely our goal to provide regular updates at least every couple weeks so that if you come back on a regular basis, you are seeing fresh and new information and new opportunities to interact and provide feedback. So you can hold me to this when we come back next year to see how I've done on that, but we truly believe it is an opportunity for us to continue ongoing feedback with our entire user base. And we're committed to keeping it fresh and interactive and a viable option to do that. You can access the site by entering csbs.org/mod in your browser or by clicking on the NMLS modernization link on the main header tab on any of the NMLS Resource Center sites. Phase 2 planning is underway with development scheduled to begin in April of this year. This phase will include a much more complex set of enhancements. So we look forward to a lot of user interaction to test and provide feedback on how best to deliver an end product that significantly improves the MLO application process. We also understand that this is step one, that there's branch and company application workflow to follow. So a lot of the questions we'll be asking will be not only on the individual process, but also how that feeds into the branch and company process that are to follow. So this is a critical phase where a lot of information we will be seeking to gather to ensure that we get this right. Our goal is to deliver a solution in early 2025 that allows an MLO to understand and deliver all application requirements from within NMLS. These improvements should not only significantly reduce user frustration with the application process, but help ensure the delivery of a complete application to the reviewing agency. Delivery of a complete application will reduce the agency user back and forth on missing requirements and should result in a reduction of the review timeline and speed the ability for MLOs to be approved and start doing business. I hope this information is helpful to bring you up to speed regarding where we are in the development process, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have regarding anything I've covered or have not.
Thank you, Dave. So we have some time for some questions from the audience on the topics we've discussed regarding NMLS and SES and the working groups. We do have some microphones right here at the end of the tables on each side. They are live. If you'd like to come up and ask a question, please do so.
Hello. Oh, my goodness.
Good morning.
And if you would just let us know your name and the organization you represent.
Okay, it's Cindy Corsaro, and now I'm with Sonova Energy Corporation. So it's odd being a spectator instead of sitting up there this year, but I'm very happy to be here and always thankful that I can be heard. So I have been out of NMLS and anything NMLS for 9 months. My company closed. I'm now with a new company in consumer finance. But what I'm finding is, regardless of the industry, some of the issues are still the same in the NMLS. So I just want to encourage you, when you are doing this wonderful modernization, to remember checklists need to be updated. I'm still working with a checklist from 2018 on an application I'm working on with my new company. Make sure all the requirements, please regulators, put all the requirements in the checklist. This is something that's being discussed throughout this whole conference, that you apply and you get deficiencies because you didn't know that there was something you had to include. So as you modernize and update, please do the same with the checklist so we know where we stand. And as far as SES, I'm thrilled that this is an ongoing process. It used to be when you got an examination with SES, you went, oh no, I have an exam in SES. Now it's, oh no, I have a paper exam with this particular state. Why aren't they in SES? So again, encouraging state regulators, please avail yourselves of this wonderful tool that you're giving us to work with. I know it's an ongoing process. I've seen a lot of changes since it was first launched that are really wonderful. So again, please do that. And then one modernization suggestion, Dave. When you have to upload documents that several states require, but you still have to check that state off, for instance, resumes for verification of your background, I was told, and please correct me if I'm incorrect here, that the state, unless you check a state, they can't see, for instance, resumes. 10 states require a resume. I just was looking at an MU1 filing for my new company, and there were 10 copies of the same resume uploaded. And when I asked why did my predecessors do that, they were told that unless you check the state in the box, if you list it in the comments, then the states in the comments will not see that that resume has been uploaded. So similar to business activities, it would be helpful for redundant requirements for states across the board. Check off resume, and just like business activities, check off 10 states that's needed, so one resume, one time, upload is complete. So those are all my suggestions. And also, again, please, regulators, when we do respond to your deficiencies, please remove them and give us our approvals, because we're really trying to do the right thing. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity, and have a wonderful panel.
Thank you, Cindy. Anybody else with a question, comment? Yes.
Hi, my name is Jim Bell. I'm with M-Source Training and Consulting. To piggyback one thing on the checklist, one of the things that we experience, and we help licensing in all 50 states for companies across our country, is listing the activities that are available under that particular license. Many times we have companies that are contract processing companies, and it's really difficult for us to pinpoint what type of a license that they should be applying for. So having the specific activities listing on the checklist would be really, really helpful.
Thank you. Anybody else at this time have a question or comment? We will have some time later on as well. We'll open it up after the slated topics, but if we don't have anybody else at this point, we can move on. We have one last update before we dive into our agenda. Rich Cortez with the Connecticut Department of Banking is a long-serving chair of the MCR subcommittee, previously the MCR working group. And Rich, if you would be willing to give us an update from the subcommittee.
Sure. So Rich Cortez, I've made Jeff Peterson my vice chair. So if you have questions after I'm gone, look for Jeff. He is my human shield here today, by the way. So as you all know, and I'm sure you're aware of, that the MCR is coming online for the first quarter. We had taken a vote a way back and presented it to Policy Committee. Policy Committee had agreed, and we set the schedule then. We continue to look for avenues to improve the MCR, so if you have something that needs to be added to it, talk to us. And mostly for the states, we do have a state supplemental form that so far we've had 4 states take advantage of it, I believe. If you've got information that's being taken from the companies out of the system that you want to incorporate into the MCR that would be appropriate for that, we encourage you to contact us and let us know what it is, and we'll start looking at the data and see if we can put it together and send it up to the Policy Committee for review and approval. That's pretty much where we are with the committee. There's not been, we've been waiting for this upgrade to happen for a long time, so we haven't been working on other changes to the data. I can tell you that there is going to be a little bit more change in the future to satisfy our ability to oversee what's happening in the servicing side of things. We need just a little bit more granular data. It's going to be probably, I think, 10 or 12 pieces of information that you're already reporting to the agencies if you're doing their loans. So we don't think it's going to be a big lift, but we'll put it together and get it out to comment at some point in the next year. That's pretty much where we are with it right now. Does anybody have any questions related to that? Yes, Amy.
Hi, Rich. So I have a question about the supplemental state-specific form. So I've actually counted 3 states that have officially adopted right now: South Dakota, New Hampshire, and Washington.
Okay.
And you may not be able to answer this, so maybe it's a question more for the room. Can we expect more states to be adopting? And is there a deadline by which that adoption period will close so that industry knows what to prepare for?
Yes and no. So the reality of it is that when we were developing this newer version of the MCR, we polled states to say, hey, look, what are you taking in from the outside that we can incorporate in here? We had a limited number of takers on that. for a lot of different reasons, some states said that they had to change statutes to be able to do it, all the usual things. So that's where we are with it. If we do get another taker, so to speak, there'll be ample opportunity for you to see what's coming. It's going to go out to comment. If we put something out and it gets delayed, please look at it now. Don't wait. But there'll definitely be comment period to it. You'll be able to know what that data is ahead of time. The data that I've seen is data that you're already reporting to the agency, so it's not
Yeah, no,
strange data.
and I understand there should be a request for comment if we're going to change the data. No, I'm asking about the current data set in the supplemental form. Can we expect more states to be adopting that?
Yeah, and Amy, that is one of the topics that was submitted by a couple presenters as well, MBA, I believe,
Yeah.
and possibly Bob Nemi talked to him about it a little bit. I did poll the policy committee group at first, just to say who else, because Kansas did require or add the form, because there are a few mortgage companies that are a little unique and where they have a few consumer loan type things and either do a filing or maybe have another license with us. And we kind of trialed it to say, let's see what we can get on this form, and maybe we can reduce an annual report or a filing in another area. Most of the comments I got back were that we weren't using the form, but I would like to know why as well. If there are I'm curious if there's other states getting information from a mortgage company that is outside the call report. What is that information, and is the supplemental form sufficient to get that information? And if not, why not? So we can open that up here to the panel. If any states are getting information from a mortgage company outside the call report on a periodic basis. Anybody here? And to the audience, are there states out there that are getting that information and would be willing to say what that information is, and if there's any impediment to using the supplemental state form? And it could be that folks don't know it exists yet. I mean, it's possible, right? It was developed, as Rich said, several years ago and implemented last year, but it's pretty short, right? I mean, it's got processing data, consumer loan questions, commercial. Those are the three that I can recall off the top of my head. So anybody getting information like that from mortgage companies in these states willing to talk about that?
Jim?
Yes.
On behalf of the state of Washington, I can make some comment about that. Yes, the state of Washington does have or collect from the supplemental report. We also have an annual assessment report that we collect data on for assessments, for the filing of assessments and payment of those on an annual basis. So unfortunately, not all the reports, the mortgage call report, our annual assessment, and now we're going to have the SSSF, that will help us with the collection of data that we're needing as a state, because as was mentioned, there's a big uniqueness and a lot of new products coming into the industry. And a lot of that, even though that may not be information we're using, let's say, to collect assessments, or a lot of it is, are these companies making unique products, especially the consumer finance products, that we need to be looking at? So we're collecting data, we're trying to learn the new things that are coming into the industry, understand them, and for us, it's a lot of just information gathering to make us better regulators right now.
Okay. So is there anything with the supplemental form that could be enhanced, or are the questions so specific for your assessment that that's unfeasible?
They are specific because from our statutory standpoint, there's only certain things that we can assess on. We do have different reports where we can ask for more data, but I'm trying not to duplicate things. If something is already in another spot, I don't want to ask for it again in another place.
Right.
So it's just a culmination. Right now, we're getting data from 3 different points.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Rich. That helped. Rick, sorry.
It's okay.
Rick.
It's not the first time, Jim.
Any other states willing to speak up or any, oh, yes. Hi, Stephanie.
It's Stephanie White, North Carolina, and we do currently request loan level data outside of the call report because that's just not something that we can obtain through that format. So
Like a loan list of, by borrower, loan level data.
Correct.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Amy, more to your point, if someone asks us to begin using the SSSF, obviously, we're going to inform you. We're going to give you some leeway there so that everybody's aware of that. It's not just going to flip a switch from 1 month to the next.
Good, you have my number, you can give it to Jeff.
Yes.
And I apologize to Liz for stealing her topic, she can talk more about it later.
Yeah. So, and yeah, we will come back, we will round back to that and in the agenda if that's okay, and we can move on at this point. So thank you for the comments so far, and I hope to keep the discussion going on that. And thank you, Rich, for the updates. And we will cover more on the call report in version 6 later in the agenda because, as you know, that has been brought up and something that we have slated for discussion. And I also want to thank Rich Cortez for all your work, not on just the call report subcommittee, but all your incredible work with the NMLS over the years. Sorry, I really can't see you. It's a little awkward. But yeah, we all thank you and appreciate you. I understand you're retiring in the summer.
I'm going to try.
Yeah. So, well, congratulations. I can't thank you enough for all your things that you've given us over the year, your wisdom. We think of the call report, we think of Rich Cortez, and I'm sure we will think of that even after you've moved on to whatever your next plan is. So, appreciate you. And if there's anything you'd like to say.
Just thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it. Nothing that I've accomplished has been me. It's always a group of people that work with me. I'm kind of just help funnel it down into something that makes more sense. So thank you all very much for everything.
All right, so then I do have an update as well on the MSB call report. Following a recommendation from the CSBS Non-Depository Supervisory Committee to integrate the CSBS Money Transmission Model Act permissible investment definitions into the MSB call report. The subcommittee has proposed changes to the permissible investment section of the call report. Comments were received from state regulators on the proposed changes, and the proposal will be issued for public comment next week. Our goal is to implement these changes to support the MTMA, the Model Act, during the summer. All right, next I'll just give my traditional Ombudsman update, especially for those that are maybe new to this meeting. This forum and this meeting is a way for us to assist users of NMLS and SES with resolution of policy and operational issues. The objective of the Ombudsman in this meeting is to foster constructive dialogue amongst ourselves between industry users, state users, and others to work mutually towards our goals of modern and efficient supervision of the state financial services. And again, I appreciate everyone being here. In addition to the issues that we're discussing today, and since the September 2023 virtual Ombudsman meeting, we've received 95 emails in the past 5 months ending January 31st, and about 20 per month. Those emails come into the inbox and they are responded to by CSBS staff, primarily Stephanie Bonomo, which thank you so much for everything you do, by the way. You're amazing. And others, we refer things to the call center, to other state regulators when needed, federal regulators, CFPB. The top 5 categories in the last 5 months in order of frequency were how to file consumer complaints, the annual renewal process, state licensing issues, including requirements, license status and process questions. Next, educational requirements and process questions around education, And finally, entitlement issues, the password resets and the account access, that sort of thing. So then, as the Ombudsman, I also sit on the NMLS Policy Committee. That committee is one of the State Regulatory Registry, or SRR's, standing committees that reports up to the SRR Board of Managers at CSBS. The NMLS Policy Committee is responsible for requirements proposals, approving and supporting some stakeholder engagement activities, like public comment periods, NMLS and system policy issues, for example. And I have invited my fellow policy committee members to join us here at the table. And we currently have Craig Christensen from Iowa, Craig, Rod Carnes from Georgia, William Purse from Texas, William, hey, Kirsten Anderson from Oregon is with us, Kirsten, and Rick St. Ange from Washington, Scott Corskadden from Alabama, and our new committee chair, Aaron Van Engelen from Idaho. So thank you all for being here with me today, and let's get the meeting started. So we have 5 submissions to discuss, all of which were posted to the Ombudsman page of the NMLS Resource Center last week. For each topic, we will hear from the individual who submitted it, and then the floor will be open to regulators and industry members seated at the table and in the audience for discussion. So again, there's 2 microphones at the end of the table. Feel free to form lines there if you have anything, and then just wait to be called on to speak. And if you'd, again, let us know your name and the organization you represent, that would be very helpful. After we discuss the submitted topics, we will open up the floor at the end of the meeting for any other topics that were not submitted to be discussed. So, first up, we will hear from Amy Greenwood Field with McGlinchey. And Amy, take it away.
Good morning. Thank you, Jim. So I submitted a handful of issues. Stephanie asked for them, so I didn't want to disappoint her. So I have a handful of issues where it appears that maybe additional public guidance, training, and/or system updates might be helpful to resolve. So I'll take them one at a time, and I think there are probably some folks along the table that want to respond to my issues. So the first one is NMLS entitlement, and I'm talking about company entitlement. So the entitlement team does a great job, and they've definitely, oh goodness, no, I'm too close. The entitlement team does a great job, and they've definitely lessened the amount of time that it takes to get a response from an initial entitlement submission. However, we have more different license types coming onto the system. We have companies that may have been in existence for 20 years, and sometimes getting that entitlement documentation, especially from the IRS, is very difficult. I listed some examples in my submission. I'm not going to go over those, but if you've ever tried to request information from the IRS, you can call them, but it can't just be a representative of the company. It has to be someone that was on the original submission. And then if you don't ask for the documentation in the right way, they may send you a letter in 6 to 8 weeks. If you know how to ask for the information, they will send you a fax if you have a fax number that they can send it to. And sometimes it depends on which representative you get from the IRS. So sometimes you have to call more than once to get someone that will help you. So I think there's an opening here for us to be mindful of the fact that we have different types of companies. They're not just companies that were just formed that have that the SS4 number or whatever on hand. So maybe we can get a little bit of leniency for those companies in the entitlement process. And it is especially frustrating for those companies to get a rejection of entitlement because there is no way to follow that thread back. And they just have to start all over and resubmit. And then the additional situation I wanted to point out was where we have new license types being added to the system. So there are existing licensees that have already been regulated by a regulator for a number of years, but now they have to join the system. I feel like those license types would benefit from a dedicated team. So the state could provide a list of the licensees that we expect to transition, and then maybe those could be fast-tracked in a different way because you already know those companies. They're not new.
Right.
So I'll pause there. I'm sure someone has something to say.
Yes, no, that's great. And I'd like to ask Mike Casagrande to respond to that. He works with Dave Dwyer and his group, and Mike, I'll let you speak to those comments.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. Morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm Mike Casagrande with CSBS. I'm not under Dave Dwyer anymore, though. I used to be. Dave taught me well. No. Amy, you brought up a lot of great points in your letter. I mean, the IRS issues, I've learned a lot myself with that. I've had to call the IRS many times trying to gather information. I don't know how we change that, but I do know that you can get through. I've done it many times. I think it just does require sometimes that responsible individual, but how do they define that? That's up to the IRS, I guess. But it's an area we've been trying to learn more and be able to respond better in those unique situations. But overall, with entitlement, I think a lot of the requests we're getting are missing documentation, names don't match, but there's no explanation. And so that makes it difficult for an agent who's trained to say, well, if it doesn't match, you're rejecting, send your notification out. So that's one of the areas we can look to try to improve. It's just difficult to also publish a exception case, and try to give the way to maybe get around something to the public. So I know there was a suggestion to put something on the Resource Center, a little more tips, things like that. We're going to look at that and see what we can do, but we don't want to just make it known that if you do have a name mismatch or something with the IRS, that you submit a letter of explanation to us. We can go through that process and understand what's going on with the company. But it makes it difficult.
Can I comment on the name
Absolutely.
mismatch? And I apologize, I can't see you down there. I know you're down there.
I keep looking at it.
In our situation, I think that the documentation was provided from the home state filing side. So you had the Secretary of State documentation that showed the progression of the name change with the formation documents and the good standing. So I would hope that we could put some weight on that. I mean, we are a state system, even though IRS hadn't updated their records yet. So just something to think about there.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, I think what we still have been dealing with a lot is again, the newer industries, and I think that was mentioned out here, new products are coming out there, so we're also recognizing that some of these companies might have 20 entities under them, with different structures, and that's what's making it even more difficult for us to understand, why are their names not matching, or they're also then sending 50 pages worth of documents, and that's very difficult for a call center agent to go through and recognize that, page 52 or something had the name change, things like that. But I think one thing that we've done, I think kind of well, but also always room for improvement, are those rejection notifications. And so that's what I think we can take back and try to recognize, as you mentioned, if we're seeing a document that shows a name had changed at that Secretary of State level or the state level, that we should be able to at least send something back in that rejection that says, this is the process that you need to go through. Contact the IRS, send us your information, and then we'll get the account created. Because we do have an exception process, which maybe I could just say it out loud because it's there. But if you have to contact the IRS, let them know that your name has changed. You send us a letter of explanation, and we're going to recognize that and still let you get in the system, just knowing that if your EIN changes due to that name change, it would result in most likely needing a new NMLS account. And so that's what we're trying to avoid as well, as those situations.
And I think if nothing else, it would be helpful if that was public on the website somewhere, that there is an exception process, and if there's something in your submission that you need to explain to us, you can do it up front. Now, those of us at the law firm level that do this all the time, we understand that. However, you have companies that are trying to do it themselves. They don't want to pay me to explain to them how to submit entitlement to NMLS.
That's a good point.
Thank you.
You want me to move on?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Keep talking.
So my second topic is one I think I've spoken to this group about before. It has to do with processing of foreign individual credit and background checks. And we do have a working group that's working on that, has been working on it for a number of years. I know that we are making progress so that eventually we can get those things into the system. However, that's not going to be something that happens tomorrow. So we are still seeing confusion with with respect to addition of individuals that live outside the country to the system. And it's not just an issue with the call center who has unfamiliarity with the issue. I had a client that spent hours on the phone with the call center trying to fulfill a background request check a credit check request for their control persons made by a state. And he finally got so frustrated, and he called me, and I'm like, you have to uncheck the box. I'm like, you can't. It's impossible for someone that lives outside the country that doesn't have a social security number to ping against to request a credit check through the system, but yet the state had asked for it. So we have a disconnect. The call center can't help. The regulators don't understand that that's not system functionality right now. It's something that has to happen outside the system. And then the other instance we had was an individual that did have a U.S. Social Security number, but had been living outside the country for a number of years. And in that instance, if you've been outside the country, you have to go back more than 10 years of residential history until you find a U.S. address to ping against that credit report. Otherwise, the system throws a flag. And that happened to me a number of years ago as well, and I called the call center, and they told me that I had to have all 8 officers and directors call TransUnion to lift the credit freeze. Come on now, that's not going to happen. So my solution at that point in time was to pull that person from the filing until I could figure out the back-end solution. But I think, it's becoming more common where we have individuals that are outside the country that are control persons for entities, not only in the money services space, but in mortgage and other areas. So I think it would be helpful if we could provide additional training, to regulators, industry, to the call center, so that they know what the current system functionality is and is not. And then also, again, let's have some additional public-facing guidance so that someone who hasn't lived through it like I can, or I have, can solve the issue on their own.
Right. Valid points, for sure. Mike, if you want to briefly speak on that.
No, I mean, I think since we went to the TransUnion new platform a couple years back, we've learned a lot as well, learning those kind of nuances that, the U.S. address needed to be in their history, even though it might be outside of their 10 years. So I think, we've learned and improved that process, but there is still a gap. At the call center level, I don't know how much we can take on it that, for them to try to learn, the system functionality, yes, they can learn, but the other things like that, we've already updated notifications a couple times. There's been a few areas, but appreciate knowing that, there's been a lot more international people in the last, we've seen in the last 2 years, a major increase in that area.
Yeah, and the second example I gave, it's something that's still happening. So I serve as chair of the Industry Advisory Council for the Money Transmitter Regulator Association. And I was having an internal IAC call, and one of our members, who is not a client of mine, was having an issue. And she's like, my staff has been on the phone with the call center. We've spent over 40 hours of time on with them. We've tried to open a ticket. Nobody can solve it. And I said, well, you have to bounce against the U.S. address. And she fixed it by the end of the call. And so, it's like I said, it's just, you don't know what you don't know. So it would be helpful if call center was able to flag, oh, this is a foreign individual. It needs to escalate or go to a different path.
Yeah, and I think there's even ways to look in the system, right? Is there other smaller enhancements while, the modernization projects are going on to try to write easier ways to identify those situations? So we can definitely take that back and look at the training, curriculum as well when it comes to the credit reports. Do we need to revamp certain things? And I think there's definitely something we can do there.
Thank you.
Jed,
Just to make a point on this, the state system
name
did
and
make
organization, please.
Oh, sorry, Jed from Warwick. Jed Bellman from Warwick. The state system did put in a policy around this in the MTMA about foreign standards and how you do it. There's no reason why you couldn't expand that to all industry. I know that it's not a model law for other areas, but the concepts were thought of with industry. There's standards on how to, and methodologies that should be deployed. And if there could be some systemization of that and training around that, since you've already adopted that standard in the MTMA, it might be helpful. Just something to think through.
Anything else on that one, or should we move on?
I'll move on to the next one.
Statement, okay.
Sorry. So the next issue I have has to do with financial statement submissions. And this has to do with the number of startup entities that we're seeing. So you have startup entities that may have parent companies that have been longstanding, so they have audited financials, but the startup company does not yet have those audited financials. And a number of states will allow you to submit unaudited financials, you know, with a statement, or they will allow you to look through to the parent company audit. But the system doesn't currently allow you to submit two types of financial, or two of the same type financial statement in the same time period. So I think this is an opportunity, especially with the model law adoptions, which does allow this for money transmitter companies to implement a system fix so that we can clearly identify these are applicant financial statements and these are parent company financial statements. And we were able to find a workaround for one of our companies who was not a money transmitter company, but then it causes further confusion for the regulators because they're like, well, you gave me the applicant before, now you're giving me the parent company, and I'm really confused. So, and submission of the parent financials is the only way to clear system set deficiencies for audits.
Say it again, the submission of a parent financial.
So if the parent is the only company in the chain that has an audited financial statement, and a regulator has set the system values to require an audit, even though they may provide exceptions, the system automatically sets a deficiency.
Right.
And the only way to clear that is to actually submit an audited statement.
Okay, right. Do you want to speak to that
Sure.
a little bit? Okay.
Hi Amy, I sent your suggestions to Phil Wims, so I'm just gonna blame him and then we'll deal with it later.
Is he not here to defend himself?
He's not here to defend himself. He just came back from paternity leave, so we love that for him. So this is his first NMLS conference he's missing in quite a while, so he's very sad to not be here. But yeah, I sent your suggestions to him. I think we've had similar, I feel like, suggestions brought up in the past also just about the system's ability to accept parent financials and having that built into the process. When Tim Lang built financial statements, he didn't think about that a long time ago. So we're basically, we'll have to refer it to the product team, and then yeah, once we would get to that phase, I did tell you earlier, I think the financial statement phase is slotted for some time in the future, but you know, Dave controls the priorities of NMLS development, so I don't know. We'll see what happens. Again, I'll just deflect to everyone else.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Anyone else you want to throw under the bus?
Not you, definitely not you.
When will this line of buses stop?
No, I'm just here for the show, so. Yes, no, and as a state regulator, I appreciate what we can do in the system. I don't want to do workarounds outside any more than you do. So, yeah, we definitely appreciate those comments. They're valid, and we can understand that issue and something that we can work towards together. So, thank you for bringing that up. And as a state that's currently passing the model law, I'm sure that we will be faced with the same challenge as we move forward. Yes. Heather.
Hi, Nancy Pickover with VIP Mortgage. One of the things I'd also like to bring up regarding the financial statements is that you can only submit, for example, the year-to-date once. So if you've got a company that has submitted quarterlies and you happen to have an application that's requiring a more recent year-to-date, and you submit that as your year-to-date, and then say 6 months later you get into the same situation, you can't submit another year-to-date for that new state because you've already submitted a year-to-date. So if there's a way to update that so that if you have to submit multiple interim financial statements besides just quarterly financial statements, depending on what a state is requiring, that would be really helpful as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Noted. All right. right, ACNs?
Yeah, so my last topic is not ACN, it's just advanced notification. So
Oh.
I'm back again asking for more communication. So I know during the last Ombudsman meeting, we urged regulators to not only provide notification of changes to law or interpretations via their own public websites, but also to share that information with their regulatory associations, including NMLS. I mean, give us a news alert. But since that time, we failed. And we've seen some instances where we had a state that added new requirements applicable to entities holding, a specific license type during the renewal window, which was, something unexpected. Asked for proof of compliance with certain federal law provisions where such compliance is not normally appropriate for that business type. And/or updated new application checklists without also notifying existing licensees that there had been a change in position. So in all of these instances, there was not also an accompanying state law change that would have provided notice elsewhere to licensees that requirements were changing. So I think we can all do better. I know regulators don't like surprises. I used to be a regulator. Industry doesn't like surprises either. So if we could all just kind of collaborate on that, I think it would be very appreciated.
Sure. Yep, noted. And there, just as a reminder, any state that wishes to get the word out quickly has an option, not only with state law and regulation notifications, but through the NMLS Resource Center. And notices that a state sends out can be duplicated and also sent out, and then also understood by the call center in advance of any changes like that might prompt more questions or calls or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right, next we'll go on to Trish Laganzinski with the Ancura, formerly Chartwell. Hey.
Thank you.
Trish.
Hi. So we have two main issues that we'd like to bring up that are impediments to licensure for our money services businesses for the money transmitter applications. The first one is the major issue, the MSB primary bank account for money transmission and the different challenges around that and that timeline and the time it takes to get a bank account. And the second one is around, again, financial statements, kind of dovetailing on some of the financial statement issues, particularly for startup companies. So around the MSB primary trust bank account, because it has such a long horizon and a timeline, it presents a lot of challenges. Would the states be open to conditional approvals? Because what happens with that, let's say 6, 8, 10 month, maybe even a year of application process and due diligence on the bank side, the letter that they get from the bank that says, we will grant you this account for money transmission once you have a license, upon licensure, because sometimes it's a catch-22 there. So they will receive a letter from the bank that they're approved once they're licensed. Are the states open to a conditional approval in that case and reviewing the application during this due diligence review process?
So thank you for the question. I'd like to ask Rick his opinion as a representative of the MTRA about that possibility for a pre-approved or conditional approval with a letter of intent to open a trust account by the bank rather than having the trust account actively opened.
Yeah, that is difficult. Well, it's been long and difficult conversation because the de-risking of financial institutions has been we've had a lot of history in that, and doing everything we can, working with federal agencies, working with state legislators. Charlie's done a lot of work in this area as well, and that's just one of those difficult situations that we have not yet accomplished. We would love to see MSBs banked. We think it would be great for the whole industry, but we just haven't got there. And Charlie,
Charlie Clark from the state of Washington. I would just add to that Trish, we used to do that quite regularly.
Yes.
Where we'd grant conditional approvals. The problem is the companies wouldn't get banked, and those conditional approvals would kind of languish and would have to deal with that. And the thought thought of having to revoke a license is like the most extreme, and forcing them to surrender their application or surrender the license is not desirable. So we're trying to work through some of those issues, but we've always kind of been open to the concept. We want companies to be successful, and, you know, we get the kind of catch-22 issue that you mentioned.
I mean, I've been around doing this for a little while, so I feel like there's definitely been a stricter tightening over the years, where in earlier years, I thought that the states were a little more open to that kind of a letter, but I think that it seems like it's narrowing at the time when it's very difficult, and the timeline for these bank accounts is getting longer again, so, yeah. The second issue that I have around financial statements is for startup companies, and some of it's kind of maybe a system issue with NMLS, and some is just like a theoretical issue. So in the NMLS checklists, a number of them do say, for startup companies, you know, a statement of condition is accepted. But then sometimes there's a blocker in the system when you go to send in the application, it blocks for audited, because the checklist says audited financial statements or a statement of conditions for startups. So there's not like a distinguishing factor there. But I think that our concern is sometimes with the MTRA and the MTMA and other issues that are coming up with kind of the trend toward wanting only audited financial statements. We're concerned for startup companies and putting in unaudited financial statements, and just kind of throwing it out to the regulators, just get their feedback on that. Is there a way that they'll accept somehow in the financial statement section where you could put them in with a conditional, like a little bit of something in that box there that says this is a startup company, and let that go through NMLS?
We've been allowing that.
For startup companies with unaudited financial statements.
Some states have been allowing that as part of the licensing process. From a system standpoint, I can't tell you if you completely get blocked or anything, but I know from an entrance and application, we've been allowing not to have audits.
That's true. Washington
for a
is,
year.
yes, that Washington definitely allows it, but there are a few states that have that as a blocker.
Yeah, and Trish, you provided examples of those states that you're seeing that basically almost a mismatch of like what the system is enforcing versus what it says on the checklist. I would imagine it might be, frankly, a mistake in the settings. So we're going to reach out to those states and work with them to like, this is how the system is acting, because this is how you have your settings set up. So we'll work with them to get the appropriate updates made. And that because if it says there's an exception on the checklist, then essentially the setting in the system should be set at the lowest they will accept.
Okay.
So that it works for all companies.
That would be great.
Yeah. So we'll follow. That's our list. As soon as you sent it, I sent it to our state relations team to follow up on. So we'll follow up on that.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
All right, so should we go down or go on to the next? Let's take a short break. We have a few more topics to cover and then the open session, but we'll do a quick stretch break. Let's do 15 minutes. So come back at 1:30 the hour.
I know. I immediately asked him to fix it, and I was like,
All right, thank you, everybody. For finding your seats, we'll get resumed here. Happy to have a little bit of a break, but we'll jump right back into our topics. All right. Thank you so much. Next, our presenter is Kathy Tomasovsky with the MSBA, the Money Services Business Association. And I'll let you kick us off here, Kathy.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everyone. I'm here representing the Money Service Business Association, and we are a diverse group of companies, large and small, that operate in this environment. Yesterday, if you had the opportunity to listen in, we spoke about the MTMA and the states that were passing it and also those that are working hard this year. So we are a strong proponent of the state system and of working together to try to come up with this harmonization process. The law itself is rather extensive, and even though it's based on the current uniform law and the things that people are comfortable with, we expect that there will be differences in maybe perhaps interpretations and or how industry viewed certain items. I guess I'm going to my second point first, Jim.
Sure.
Because I think it's important that, the collaborative work that we began in the beginning of this model law development continue in its implementation phase. And while we are working in groups to, work and discuss, I think working in isolation will not get us to a resolution of and a common understanding quickly. We spoke earlier that the call report, for example, will be updated this year in July to accommodate the new permissible investment categories that are part of MTMA. No doubt there will be questions on that, and how to handle that. For example, I know that there's limited resources from your area in order to do that, but I think that just putting the report out for a comment without sort of getting the give and take of the industry on that particular report, for example, is critical. The MSB call report, the reason why we also think it's important is really the only data of the industry, the money transmission industry. It's a great source of information, so improving that, improving the quality of that data, having that data be consistent is important. So that's one example. Another example is on change of control, some of the intents of the model law and how that would be handled. While we may not have the system provisions yet, the interpretations by the states as we're sort of passing through this phase of transition of some states are in model law, some states are not. I think it's important to understand that in my conversations here today with some of the regulators also, they have questions, right? I'm an MTMA state. How are you handling this? Oh, sorry. How are you handling this change? So while they have the opportunity to discuss this amongst themselves every 2 weeks, and industry is discussing things from an operations perspective and from a legislative perspective, I really think it's critical that we bring those groups together, maybe just once a month, to be very practical and work through those items, and then to communicate out how do we handle that. I think some of the points that Amy and Trish brought up earlier, right, in terms of how the system operates, we all know there's some unique aspects that we have to live with right now. But, we've got Rich retiring, we've got different people retiring. There's a lot of new people coming on board, and I think that trying to not just address the MTMA issues and how we get there, but also to provide, as I said to Rick, like cheat tricks, I call them, on how to use the system for those that maybe are less experienced but are coming on board is valuable. And I don't think you get at that value unless it's a give and take. So that's kind of my summary on the second point there. I would be interested there. My first point, and I think, Amy, you talked a little bit about this, is renewal checklists. Last year, as we were implementing the MTMA, I began sort of a drumming of the topic that for states that are passing that and the effective dates, it's really important. The renewal checklist is the vehicle to help communicate to companies, whether they're my members or not, what are the expectations, what are the dates associated with the change in permissible investments, the change in reporting. And unfortunately, many of the states did not abide by that. It may have been some, instruction that you provided, CSBS provided to the NMLS group, but the regulators were not participating in updating those. And that is just vital for us. And it gets into the next issue where, you know, Amy alluded to too with one of the states where in the middle of the renewal period, they sort of made a change that they determined, it was not statutorily based, but they were sort of bullying members that they weren't going to get their renewal license unless they made this change. Everybody here knows you cannot make a systems change on any kind of payment system in the fourth quarter of a year, right? You are preparing, you've got a lot of access there. So there were some unreasonable expectations put on it. Larger companies knew enough to help push back. Smaller companies were bullied. And, you know, they were sort of scurrying until we sort of helped to sort of facilitate pushing back. But it shouldn't be that if you're a small company and you're dealing with the regulator, that you should have the same abilities as the large companies in terms of the communication and understanding there. And at the end of the day, they weren't even taking your phone calls when you wanted to speak to them and help understand that. They were saying, no, we're just communicate by email. So it's not all states, and you know, we like to think that we try to have a good relationship with the state regulators, and I think it's a give and take, but I do think it's worth noting that not all your peers are operating under the same guidelines, and it's really harmful to small companies, and it's harmful to the overall attitude of industry in terms of interactions.
Thank you, Kathy, for those important topics. In terms of the working with regulators on the MTMA, I'd like to ask Bo Fears from Georgia and Karen Tierney from Arkansas to speak a little bit about that and the possibilities that we might have to address some of these ongoing issues with implementation for the states passing the Model Act.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Kathy. You know, you and I talk quite often on this issue, and MTRA, I think, has developed a lot of mechanisms with communicating with industry over the past few years, and we need to continue that. We recognize that. Amy, the chair of the MTRA Industry Advisory Council, has been instrumental in helping us communicate with the industry, and we really appreciate everything that she does. But I think we need comments. We need to know what's going on before we can even start developing a pathway to setting up a group. Because until we know what the pain points are, we don't know what regulators to get in the room. You know, is it permissible investments, change of control? So there's different areas that we need to focus on, absolutely. But until we know what the pain points are, it's harder for us to develop that working group. But I definitely, if there's any industry that would like to talk to Amy and she can keep it keep it offline and just let us know what the pain point is, we'll accept the comments that way. Just talk to Amy.
Thanks, Karen.
So, you know, Kathy, a couple things I'd want to add is, you know, you indicated how that we're having these bi-weekly calls through CSBS. There's also calls through METRA, right, where, you know, individual states bring up issues and we try to come to a uniform conclusion, right? And I don't know, South Dakota does a wonderful job, right, about net worth and trying to get consensus among the states. But I really want to echo Karen's comments that if without knowing what the issues are that the industry is facing, if we could have those in writing, that would really help us figure out the best way to address them. You know, the only issue, quite candidly, that's been brought to us by the industry to date is the payroll processor issue, right? Should they be covered or not? And that's not an unintended consequence. That was an intentional consequence to CANJA, right? And so we're still struggling with that. But yeah, provide it in writing, and we'll figure out the best path forward.
Thank you both. And, Rick?
Yeah, I just want to say, as for the MTRA board, I am the representative for the NMLS Policy Committee, so I'm more than glad to take things from you directly, Kathy. I mean, Amy does the same thing through the Industry Advisory Committee, so we will find a way to make sure that the Policy Committee gets this stuff for discussion.
Thank you. And so just to reiterate for those that may not be quite as familiar, the MSB Call Report Subcommittee is in existence and handles some of these issues. Similar to what we talked about before, making some updates for the permissible investments in the call report. There's the MMET, the Examination Task Force that works under MTRA, and the Non-Depository Supervisory Committee at the higher level in the organization is up the governance chain from those committees. And so amongst those three, and possibly other conversations offline, wherever, we will definitely look forward to addressing those issues as they come up. But you know, I myself, as a state from the state of Kansas, like I said, we are one of the states that's currently passing legislation this year to implement the Model Act. And you know, we crave that collaboration. We don't want to reinvent the wheel when it's coming up to a complex issue regarding the law. And it's a change for us the way we used to do things. Obviously, we did the repeal replace version because we like the setup of the law, and it's much more structured and similar to our sister organizations. So, like I said, we crave that discussion and would like to be involved in that to know, you know, before we get too far down the path of one specific exam or specific entity, has this been covered before? Are we making a decision that's really against the grain? We're not looking to do that, so would like to see that collaboration amongst the states as well. Karen or Amy?
So I'm happy as IAC chair to take whatever comments anybody wants to give me. However, this system, the model law, was based on a collaborative process. I mean, CSBS owned that process, brought industry and regulators to the table. It only makes sense that we continue to meet at that table after the process is ongoing. And I mean, CSBS is hosting regulator-only meetings. I think it makes sense to also for CSBS to host industry-only meetings, and then we can meet together as appropriate. Because, you know, Kathy has her membership, but that only goes so far. I mean, I have clients that only go so far. We're going to miss folks unless we open it up to an actual discussion that is hosted by someone that can manage that.
And thank you for your comments. I am so proud of how states have been collaborating so far on this. I mean, we have, you know, one-off conversations on, have you seen this? What do you think about this? But also collaborative conversations quarterly on, you know, what are we seeing on the call report? What are we seeing on tangible net worth? And I've just been so impressed with how the states that have passed it so far, and the states that are approaching passing it, having those conversations together. And I just want to echo everybody's comments and just really impressed with how the state system is working on this.
Yes. Yes, agreed. It's been very helpful. So, and we talked about exam teams too. You know, Money Transmitter is paved the way for multi-state exams. You know, it works. It's a well-oiled machine when you look at other industries, and it's very nice to see that collaboration. But each exam itself, you know, each schedule only goes so far, and only so many ears hear the issue. So it's really important, like you said, when we're talking together, and we do talk regularly about issues as states. So even inviting an industry representative to one of those meetings to bring up some issues or a couple issues so that everybody hears the same thing would be, I think, very important. So.
And we do, when we hear an issue, we try to push it out because we have MTRA quarterly chats, we have, you know, MTRA meetings. We do try to push out anything we do here, and then also collaborating with CSBS when we do know of an issue or a solution. We would definitely try to push that as much as we can, and we need to continue that,
yeah.
To your point.
Yep. Very good. So as far as the checklist and requirements issues that you mentioned, I do have a few comments that we have. And CSBS does request that agencies have their renewal checklist updated prior to September 1st or the Friday before Labor Day, so that they are well in advance of the renewal season with any changes or dates that are required. I understand as new laws are passed, you know, updating the prior year's list is crucial, as you say, to really dictate what new requirements are coming and what dates, if any, that they align. We had to crossed this path ourselves in Kansas, and we decided to make the law effective on the 1st of next year. So if it passes and signed by the governor, it'll be effective on the 1st, but we wrote in that the renewal requirements would be based on, as if we're getting a new license on the 1st. So the renewal requirements will be based on the model law representations so that you can hold a license as of the 1st, but we did try to coincide it with the renewal period because we'd heard that other states had success in that area. So, but yeah, communication is key. Any changes that are made to the checklist after the publication date or after Labor Day are noted in the agency-specific alerts section of the renewal page of the Resource Center. Following the publication date this year, there were 16 changes made, and we had, we just wanted to remind states that it's an issue for industry to do their best to update those lists and make those requirements available through the system as much as possible so that people know what to expect. So. All right, well, thank you again, Kathy, for that topic. If we don't have any other comments related to that, we can move on. All right, our next set of speakers is William Cooper and Liz Facemeyer with the MBA, and they will be bringing up issues with regard to the mortgage call report and data privilege. We also have Alicia Sears from the Mortgage Bankers Association and Bob Nemi from Wiener Brodsky and Kiter. So I will kick it off to Coop.
Thanks very much. Can everybody hear me? Great. Well, good morning, and it's good to be back. Let me start by saying that on behalf of MBA, please accept our sympathies on the recent passing of Buzz. He's a great guy, and I didn't work with him as much as others at the organization, but I always used to bump into him at the lunch places because our offices were so close together. And at MBA, we know about grief at the moment ourselves, having suffered through the recent sudden death of our beloved former CEO, Dave Stevens, also fighting cancer. And it's a reminder of what I wanted to say today, which is that this community of housing policy people is a bit of a family. Staff at CSBS join us, like Alicia, MBA staff, sometimes journey over to CSBS. Regulators sometimes go work for our member companies, and sometimes the opposite direction occurs. And what I wanted to talk about a little bit is that family and what we've done together. But let me first also say what I like to always say when I'm given a microphone at either NMLS or Armor, which is just thank you. Thank you for taking a week here and a week in the summer to be away from your desks at jobs that are often under-resourced, to make time to be available to us and our members. And that opportunity cost is not something we don't, we appreciate it. We know what it costs for you to do all of this. And that's not even speaking to the hours that you spend in committees as volunteers, and the purpose of which is to try to drive consistency across different state requirements. So we appreciate it, and I'd like to always start with a little bit of grace on that. I do want to talk a little bit about some context, I guess, is the best word to use to describe it. This is, I was reflecting on Chuck's question the other day, or I think it was just yesterday, we were saying, how many times have you been to one of these? And I think this is my 12th. And my first one was with Ken Markison, an avuncular figure in my life and probably in the lives of many in the industry, and now a colleague of Bob Naimi over at Wiener Brodsky. And he brought me to my first Armor conference and did all the talking. And then he said, next time it's going to be you. You're going to do all the talking. I said, sure, Ken, And we, 6 months goes by, and I say, okay, so what are we going to do at NMLS or Armor, whichever it was? And he says, oh, it's going to be easy. It's going to be fine. You're going to be great. We've got a model bill. We've got a legal opinion. yeah, you're going to talk about transitional licensing. It's like, okay, great. And I would describe it as the third rail of the Ombudsman meeting in those days. And I remember, I'm looking at my Massachusetts friends, I remember we were in Boston, and Tom Brennan, I'm not going to say he shouted, but he articulated his deeply held views with a passion. And the quote that I remember a decade later is, "I'm not interested in handing out learner's permits." And yeah, I'm not saying I was shaken, but I am quoting him 10 years later. But the thing about, I say that because the thing about that issue is we continued to work at it in these forums, back in DC, staff to staff with our members. We took ideas back to our constituencies and continued to plug away. And you presented at one of the Ombudsman meetings 3 novel approaches that we embraced. You know, the Uniform State Test, which itself was a 5-year collaboration to get done around the country. The expansion of the definition of approved inactive, which was creative and I think helped some loan officers move from the federal regulatory system into a state supervised system. And then the other piece was the shielding of education and testing requirements from employers in that federal system so that loan officers willing to make that move and transition could do that without losing their jobs, in a case of retribution or something. So, even in that issue, we had some agreement and worked together. And ultimately, transition licensing became temporary authority because of that collaboration. And we worked on language. We were running a bill that wasn't really any good. I can say that because it's a lot of years later, and you guys came in and helped us work on that language, and ultimately that got introduced. And I mention it because an extraordinary thing then happened. That bill moved through the House Financial Services Committee in 2 different Congresses, and then on the floor of the House of Representatives in 2 different Congresses, without a single vote against it. Just went on consent. The product of our collaboration broke the rule in DC of partisanship that currently pervades. And I think that's extraordinary. We should remember that as we talk about our differences, because there are these moments of clarity where we can work together and achieve a result that works for both sides. And that's not the only one. Over the last decade that I've been kicking around this program, we had the cap liquidity bill. I think we worked on that for, Margaret, I'm looking at you, maybe 5 years in different guises from MBA. Ultimately, when you released it in 2021, you included the piece that linked the federal requirements, which we knew were changing, and was important to us that we not have sort of a duplicate set of standards for capital liquidity and governance. And we're in the middle of implementing those federal policy pieces now. And we had, even on process issues, agreement where we suggested, and it came out of, I think, of an MCR discussion where we said, look, you really do need to sort of embrace some kind of Administrative Procedures Act. And, that was included in your announcement yesterday, your result. And we really appreciated that there was sort of now a more formal notice and comment period for changes to the NMLS system. And, the list kind of goes on, and I'm proud of that work and our contributions to it. The work that you did individually in the pandemic as regulators to help loan officers serve consumers and stay safe in their homes by allowing remote work flexibilities in those states that mandated that you work out of a licensed branch was essential. And collectively, when you did the unusual thing of releasing your memo, the NDSC memo, so that we could use that with state policymakers in legislatures to explain our views that we needed to sort of have this beyond sort of state executive orders and sunset dates that carried with them. It was very helpful. And ultimately, I know Bob and Hayden is here someplace, drafted some legislation that we've used around the country that was based on your original language and those temporary permissions that got issued in haste almost in early March, as the world was a pretty scary place. And we've been successful in more than half the country in using what essentially was a collaborative process to enact permanent changes and sort of serve a post-pandemic world and make the industry more resilient for natural emergencies. But I think the one that I'm really most impressed by is the one when I was at the Ombudsman meeting back in April, and I think I read it into the record, your letter to the CFPB on the repeat offenders database proposal, which was, I mean, it didn't make any sense to us. I don't think it made any sense to you, and you guys put it in writing in your CSBS Armor, and I think there were a few other organizations on that. And sort of was a little bit frustrating given how many hours and how much money you probably put into developing and maintaining the consumer access system. So I mention all of that because I think it's important to have context when we do disagree. And in the last 6 months, there's been some challenge in implementing the V6 MCR, and we're going to talk about that today. But I do believe, at least I don't want to signal through our comments today or anything our members may say that we are not fully committed to that partnership and the work that we do together, even though it is at some times full-throated. But there are going to be moments when even members of families disagree, and we want to talk about a couple of them today. So I learned the lesson from Ken Markison of handing difficult conversations over to colleagues to present. So I'm joined by Liz Facemeyer, who's Director of State Government Affairs, joined our team last year and leads our State Legislative and Regulatory Committee, which our Chair and Vice Chair, Keisha Whitehall-Wolf, is Chair, and Josh Weinberg is in the audience, I assume someplace there, respectively our Chair and Vice Chair. And then Alicia's going to speak later on from our Regulatory Council team. So over to Liz.
Thank you for that bus scoop. All right, and I want to thank everybody for the opportunity. I don't know if you guys can hear me. Are we good?
Not yet.
A little bit?
You don't have to turn, you shouldn't have to turn it on.
Hello, hello. I think I hear it. All right. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today. As Coop said, there may be some disagreements today, but it is out of partnership that we appreciate the opportunity to speak and bring this to your attention. And I want to make sure everybody in the room understands the partnership that I'm talking about when it comes around to the Mortgage Call Report version 6 implementation. We really appreciate all the work that CSBS has done, as well as Armor, for releasing those grace period requests to the states. And additionally, since the announcement of the MCR version 6 implementation period, I know CSBS has worked very hard with industry to give us support, and we want to appreciate you guys for that. So we want to thank you for the biweekly office hours, the testing opportunities for vendors, flying down to speak at our Accounting and Financial Management Conference, speaking on our IMB Executive Council, speaking on our education webinar event, and the dedicated MCR version 6 resource page and everything that has come with it. So I just want to make sure everybody understands in the room. You guys have been working very hard to support industry, and we really do appreciate that, and we acknowledge that. With that said, I do have some concerns, and Amy brought it up earlier about the state-specific supplemental form, which is a lot of S's and hard to an acronym. So I'm just going to say the supplemental form. The stated intent in the original proposal talked about eliminating a lot of the additional reporting that's around the MCR, which I think is a very admirable thing. This industry can get behind. Anything to simplify managing 50-state reporting is always appreciated. But in the more recent conversations around the MCR, it seems like this is actually a form created out of the version 6, and that it talks about removing the consumer and the commercial lending aspects in version 5 into the supplemental form. So I think some clarity around what that is. I was looking through the coursework for the MCR session later, so maybe I'll ask my question again there. But what this report does or does not do, I have the same sentiment that Amy talked about, in that only 3 states have adopted it, and maybe there's a 4th. I think you said Kansas is, but you're not on the list right now. So thank you for that. But if it does not account for stuff that was in version 5, it needs to be in this supplemental form. I think we're going to need a lot more adoption from the states. Looking at the list right now, it only counts for about 10% of mortgage licensees that are in the NMLS system, and it's about 2,300 total. So we know there's about 15 states or so out there that do have a lot of additional reporting out of there, outside of the MCR, so anything we can do to get them into the supplemental form is great. I think we talked about it was renewal season, so there's a lot of grace provided that maybe this hasn't been accepted yet because the state's regulator office is working through the renewal season. And I say this with no disrespect, but the MCR version 6 implementation period was also in a timeline where the industry was in renewal season as well, and we were held to the expectation that we do get this work done and implement this version 6. And a lot of the other conversations around it, again, I don't mean disrespect, was that this MCR version 6 proposal has been out for 5 years, but so has the state-specific supplemental form. So I think just asking for everybody to work on the same playing field and have the same expectations on that. And then with the version 6 adoption, we are still kind of concerned about the deadline and where everybody is at. I do want to thank the 27 states plus DC, and there's I think at least one that's not listed on the NMLS website, for providing public guidance on the grace period provided for the filing, as requested by CSBS and ARMOR. The grace periods range from 30 to 90 days, but without a full 50 state plus DC grace period adoption, they're not going to provide the relief needed for industry. Industry will still be expected to file based on the most conservative guidance, which at this point is to file on time. So if one state does not offer the grace period, the industry will think, well, I have 27 states, maybe 29 plus DC, are not going to come after me with enforcement actions, but I still have to worry about 22. So we've heard some regulators are not putting anything in writing, but they will accept good faith efforts. Our ask is to still make a public comment, because unless you are asking or talking to each state regulator, or if you're not on the list, then you're not going to know what to expect from each office and what a good faith effort is. I know that I've heard submitting all zeros is not an acceptable good faith effort. We've heard from industry that there's a little bit of uncomfortableness in submitting dummy data or false data knowingly. That hasn't really been acceptable in the past, so I think just working through some of that discomfort with industry would go a long way. And our last request is to establish like a de facto national standard where we get all 50 states plus DC to provide the MCR grace period, mainly for the following reasons. The XML specs were not provided until October, which is months after the announcement. There wasn't anything to build around until then. There's still questions around the change definitions and the change in line items for version 6 to version 5, where certain transactions are accounted for. During the office hours, they're not quiet hours for Jessen. He's still fielding a lot of questions, so I think that's kind of an indication that we're not quite there in the clarity we need. And part of the reason I think that is because the institutional knowledge of those who built version 5 on the last change are not at these companies or licensees anymore. They may not even be at the vendor space anymore, so I think that a lot of the folks working on this right now are having to relearn what is the mortgage call report, what goes into it, and then having to figure out how to build around the changes from there. I do want to point out the vendor community is going to be largely responsible for this first filing. With the market that we're in, and again, the institutional knowledge leaving these filing companies, a lot of it's going to be put onto the vendor community, and making sure that they do have the support and resources they need is going to be crucial. They have to work outside the NMLS system. I know in one of the vendor calls, it was asked to create some kind of an account for them to get access to the system. That may be something we want to consider going forward as more and more of this work is put on vendors. And lastly, I believe there's only been a handful of successful submissions, which is concerning and what's going to happen day of, just to make sure there's no technical difficulties. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak, and if you have any questions for me.
Thank you. So at this point, let's see. We went into supplemental state form. We did talk about this a little bit before. Is there anybody that's got anything to comment on, or questions about the form, or further discussion on that supplemental?
This is William Purse from the Department of Savings Mortgage Lending in Texas.
Yes.
And we do intend to use the supplemental form, but obviously one of the things we did not want to do was actually to drop that form on people and give them some time to be able to gather the information. And so we were going to adopt a regulation, or we intend to adopt a regulation. And what we're really looking for is a loan processor information. We didn't really want to collect information out of the typical mortgage call report without, and so now that there's this supplemental report, we're obviously going to use it. But obviously, one of the things we did not want to do is just to drop it on the industry and say you have to do it right away, because they may not have gathered the information, or are people who have just really been in other parts of this, just in Texas alone. And so we wanted to make sure that that information was going to be given to them in a way that allowed them to gather that information. And so we will have a proposal that obviously people will have an opportunity to comment on. But so you could say there would be 5 states that will adopt the form, so eventually.
Sure. And you said that loan processor information is what you're after.
Yes, we're not interested in the consumer information or the commercial information. And we've reached out to CSBS, and I think there's ways that you can just limit it to that information without having somebody answer all of the questions. And I know that we've communicated that, but in our desire to move towards that way with the CSBS.
What's the timing of the proposed regulation?
Well, I mean, right now we're currently in rule review at the moment, and so we're in the process of drafting it. And so what will happen is there will be a draft of that regulation that'll be proposed, and we'll have a stakeholders meeting. And at that point, after we have the stakeholders meeting, we will certainly have an opportunity to have industry's input. At that point, we'll gather the information and we'll come with a proposal to our oversight board. So you're looking at about a 5 to 7 month period before adoption. And obviously, we would have a delayed implementation for that. Yeah, we wouldn't want to drop that during the renewal season. So we are well aware of that, but so there will be some delay in that proposal.
Thank you, William.
Can I ask a question about delayed implementation? Then would it be safe to say that once you adopt that regulation, you would be collecting data from that point forward, not going retroactive?
Right, it would not be retroactive. It would certainly going backward, or not going backwards, but going for that point where we had the implementation date. And that's really to allow people the opportunity to know they have to gather the information.
Perfect, thank you.
So, Liz, Rich Cortez. So I have to give you a disclaimer. I'm not reflecting the policies or thoughts of my state. I'm just speaking as the MCR subcommittee chair here. So, Liz, I support virtually everything that you were talking about there. I'm sorry?
Just virtually.
Yeah, virtually.
Generally.
So if you have issues with figuring out what definitions are or how things have changed, contact Jessen, and we're happy to set up any kind of meetings that you want to have. If you have specific questions, if you can give those to us in advance, we'll, figure them all out so we're not figuring it out on the call. But we're happy to have a call and iron all of that out. I'll do weekly calls if you want. I don't know how Jeff feels about that, but I think the more calls we have in getting the definitional issues ironed out, the better we are. As far as the implementation stuff goes, I have no idea how the technology works behind the scenes, so I can't even begin to help you there. I would refer you to CSBS. So we're happy to, create more FAQs as time goes on. And the subcommittee has been doing more FAQs. I don't know if they've been posted yet or not, but we're dealing with all the questions that come in through the hotline. So we're here for you. Give us a call.
Thank you.
And I also support more use of the SSSF. Can we just call it the SF from now on, the supplemental form? Thanks. Okay, so yeah, I totally support more usage of that. The more states that can change their laws or do whatever they need to do to be able to use that form, and if the data is appropriate for that form, tell us about it. We'll talk about getting it on there so you can get rid of an out of the system report. The only one that we can't do is getting monthly loan reports in, because that would be explosively voluminous. So we just can't do that. But anything that you can collect quarterly in the normal course of business would work.
I think one of the issues, and Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the questions get asked on the office hours, and they have to get taken back, and they aren't necessarily getting a response, and so they're asked again, and they may or may not flow to the FAQs. And I think there's a degree of frustration among our members that they're seeing that.
So if you're not getting a response on something, put it into the MCR hotline and let's see if we can handle it through that venue. I mean, there's just so much to do in this realm. So it might fall off of somebody's plate, and I'm happy to pick it up if necessary.
Appreciate it. Would you be willing to jump on some of these office hours? If you're, I mean, it might help. I just thinking creatively here. Okay.
And this is Mike Cascarande, a little loud there again. We do have working versions of the FAQs, so I think we should probably have a newer version coming out soon with some updated guidance. Not necessarily everything you've said, but it's definitely something we're constantly looking at internally with our training team, as well as Jessen, and trying to review, make sure we can keep those fresh and relevant as well.
Thanks. Any speed that can be applied to that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right. Oh, yes, Josh, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Josh Weinberg, I'm with First Line Compliance. I want to first echo some of the comments Coop had made. Many of you, I feel like our family. I've been at 11 of the 12 of these because I missed one for my honeymoon, but these are like reunions. And so my comments first are not personal. I'm going to echo another phrase that Coop used, which is full-throated, and I do think my comments will be full-throated. I was in the seat of a lender for a long time. I was part of the original federally registered institutions working groups, participated on the state side. We've all been at this a long time. In my current role, I'm a consultant. I work with lenders and call report filers from many different types of entities. The point I'm really concerned about is this component of leniency related to the version 6. And I had some full-throated conversations with some of my family last night at the regulator meet and greet. And I just want to echo or raise some of those issues more broadly. To the point that, Rich, that you made, you don't know the sausage, how it's made in the technology. Don't expect you to. I worked at a LOS like a long time ago, and I still feel like I'm a recovering technologist. What I can tell you, though, is that of the major loan origination systems that cover 90% of the at least 90% of the origination volume for lenders that report information, they have not released their versions to support version 6 of the call report. So the notion that someone may file zeros because they're not exercising good faith attempts to comply is not the right answer. The right answer is they don't have the data to file. And so this leaves us with a quandary. Washington, thank you for officially extending the filing deadline. Oregon has been clear there will be leniency. Connecticut has been clear there will be leniency, but there is a divergence of what lenders should do if I'm licensed in Washington, Oregon, and Connecticut. Do I file zeros? No, I can't do that because that's not good faith. But if I don't, my only other option is file dummy data. I kind of think that's worse than zeros. Or file late. And so in talking with some of my family last night, it seems to be consensus around filing late is better than filing zeros. So if that's the case, please put that out. That's not unqualified. The conversations I've had made it clear if you're going to file late, that should be accompanied with communication to the regulator to say, I'm filing late and here's why. Totally acceptable and understandable and able to be accomplished by industry. So if that's the approach, let's get it out there. But I don't know if that's the approach that's consistent amongst all the regulators. I think some regulators, and jump up if I'm wrong, would prefer zeros instead of filing late. Some states have statutory requirements that if you file late, you will be fined. Some states have within their regulations, in their examinations, if someone filed late, they were required to cite it in the exam. And to change that will require reg change or at least input from the commissioners of the departments. In the great aspiration of consistency, we are still left with variation. And this is a point where I can't file only in Connecticut. I either file in all or I don't file at all. as one of the original filers with the call reports, I will stand here and admit at a lender, I was late on the first call report. And I was late because I worked for a sub of a depository, and there was nuance on what should be reported or not. And I raised an issue with the state almost a month before filings were due. They didn't know. It was a nuanced question. This was new. They didn't get back to me until the day after call reports were due. So I filed a day late. And then I got naughty letters from every state saying, you filed late. So at the first Ombudsman meeting, at the first NMLS group meeting after the call reports came out, I raised this issue. And I said, please, regulator family, allow us to separate the states so I can submit when I'm ready and not submit when I'm not, so I'm not buried under this. And what I was told, verbatim, oh, Josh, the requirements behind call reports is a timeliness standard, not an accuracy standard. So if you don't have accurate data, file all zeros so you get it in on time. There is historical precedent for why this happens. And I understand there has been abuse by companies who still for years have filed zeros and never amended. But I want you to partially understand why there's this precedent or this history for filing zeros. And if there's a change, let's communicate it and let's come up with a consistent way of what lenders should do to abide by these leniency standards.
If I can address some of that. I think the key here is communication with your regulator. Whether they're going to accept zeros or they're going to accept best available data at the time that you file, which is subject to an amendment later. You know, we understand that. Dummy data, I really don't recommend dummy data. And again, this is just me talking, this is not the state. You're best off to communicate with your regulator. Say, look, I don't have the data, I have part of the data, it's not gonna be useful if I put it in this way. Ask them what they want you to do. And sort of act on that. To act unilaterally without any communication, you're gonna have trouble. We are more than 50 regulatory agencies that we're talking about here. It's difficult to herd cats onto the same page, right? So communicate with them individually. It's a big task if you're a national type lender. It's a little bit easier if you're in just 1 or 2, 3 states. I get that, but I don't think that there's no easy solution here. And I think the best policy, just talk to each one of your regulators. And understand that there's a give and take, and everybody's gonna be different. And what we might say in Connecticut, I might say, yeah, okay, you're having a data problem, you're telling me you're gonna be able to report it in 3 weeks? Give me a call at 3 weeks, tell me if you're ready or not. We're not gonna take you out a half a year, but maybe we can have an agreement and get it done that way. I just don't see any other way around that particular problem.
Yeah, thanks, Rich, and thanks, Josh, for the comments. I know there's an explanation, there's some freehand comment boxes in areas in the report, so if the choice is made to file the zeros, you can at least explain that we're putting this in here to meet the deadline, but there's more to come. And again, yes, reaching out to each state that you have any concern with that hasn't already put in whether they can extend the deadline officially in the list. So, but with that, we do need to move on to the other topics.
Could I just ask 2 very quick follow-ups?
Sure.
I think I'm going to repeat my request from almost 13 years ago. I think we need to look at separating submission of the call reports to a state-by-state basis so we avoid, if we have inconsistent opinions, we need to have individual ability to submit according to those states. And then second, just to echo, please get some guidance out. I would love to hear if other states have input or comments to filing late is okay or zeros. I think those are our choices. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so if you'd like to move on with the next topic, then Alicia.
Great. So thank you for this opportunity to speak. Unlike Coop and now I learned Josh, this is actually my first meeting, so I'm really honored to be here. What I'm going to do is kind of set up the problem and some proposed fixes we believe we would like CSBS to acknowledge, and then I'm going to turn it over to Bob to provide some of his insights. So we have been hearing from several of our members and their concerns about the public availability of very detailed company-specific financial information accessed from NMLS. So just for the audience, some of the state regulators have been providing complete MCR data to individuals based on State Freedom of Information Act requests. For example, and we won't be getting into the merits of these papers, but on at least 2 occasions, the privileged material, so company-specific information, was provided to researchers for projects related to the non-bank mortgage sector. Now, in reviewing those papers, there appears to be no requirements that were either imposed, no conditions that were placed on these researchers to at least aggregate the data or anonymize it in their papers to protect this confidential information. For any of you interested, our members were not very happy about some of their information that was published in a Syracuse University Whitman School of Management paper. So, we understand that there are state FOIA laws that permit such disclosure of licensee information that certainly predate the development of the MCR and the state agency's, evolving role as prudential regulators of independent mortgage bankers. But we also believe that given this role, and now that the NMLS collects detailed proprietary financial information on IMB licensees to conduct the safety and soundness supervision, it's really a time to do a comprehensive re-examination of the protections that are given to such information. In kind of convening these calls, we believe there are some easy fixes and then some long-term solutions. But as many of my colleagues have pointed out, we need to move on this collaboratively and proactively. So what are some of the issues and maybe some of the proposed fixes? First, we think that there needs to be certain updates to the NMLS resource page, specifically the frequently asked questions. These are kind of tucked away at the bottom. For example, there's a question asked, will the MCR be made available to the public? And the response there is, company-specific reports will not be publicly available. Aggregate data may be released to the public at a future date. We feel this is quite misleading, and there's an opportunity to probably revise some of that language. Second, we are aware that CSBS has spent a lot of money and resources into creating the Survey of Information Sharing Protections, a 50-state survey, and done a lot of work through the Information Sharing Protections Task Force. Honestly, we are not sure how utilized that tool is, and so it seems like there can be a lot more work done to at least showcase all of that work, and whether it be through making updates to that survey or just making sure that the mortgage portion of it is more robust, there is an opportunity to make that, showcase that work more prominently. And honestly, no disrespect to Washington, but we do feel that CSBS should identify states similar to Washington and make it known to licensees that their company financials may be subject to a similar release. And finally, kind of wrapping it up, in general, I think this review really needs to become CSBS's problem. It's not just a state-by-state fix your FOIA laws. Again, this is a broader issue, and whether it be through revising terms of use agreements or making this a priority through the NDSC or some other relevant committee, I think this is the opportunity to bring that up. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Bob to provide any additional insights.
Thank you, Alicia. I'm Bob Nemi, Director of Government Affairs with Wiener Brodsky Kiter. Hopefully you hear that as not an attorney, which I am not. But I am chair of the Industry Advisory Council for ARMOR. I'm vice chair for the CMB Mortgage Society, Mortgage Banker Society, and I'm a former ombudsman. And this is not a new topic. This is a known discussion within the CSBS community. It's been a challenge for years. It's something that we talked about when I was ombudsman. It's something that was discussed in many meetings. And MCRs in whole have been a frequent topic at these meetings many, many times. It's definitely needed for supervision and exam prep, exam scoping, but it's been stated by me in this meeting, it's been stated by Rich, it's been stating at other times that we've held this, that the data is confidential and it's not going to be shared. Alicia mentioned one. I cite the portion of the Federal SAFE Act, and in short it says this information may be shared with the regulatory agencies without the loss of privilege or the loss of confidentiality protections provided by federal and state laws. So while the basic version in the FAQs, which I also cited in my letter, says it's not going to be released, this says it, and it gets to be an upsetting topic. And I'm going to admit that I was mostly upset at the beginning, not that the data was released, but how it was used and the inferences made by the letters and the shadow, lending, as well as the lack of regulatory oversight, because I have great respect for this system and how we work together and how the states joined to have this, but it's a challenge. How do we fix it? How do we move forward? I don't know the answers to those things, but I do have questions specifically stated in my letter. When is it confidential? When will it not be confidential? When might it be shared? I'd also like to know how many times has this been shared? There are 2 cited in mine. I didn't cite others that I know of, other public disclosures on Reddit, etc. What does CSBS do to protect that data? I know MTAB and the education side is very aggressive to go after and protect it. Entities are not trying to gather test stat information and share it, and they've actively enforced those. How can they enforce the terms in the agreement? I know that Buzz was very active in supporting this with different states. I know different regulators have got into this. Who's it been shared? And could a company request FOIA information on other lenders in a state to use it for business purposes? How many times? Whom? I would like to say, since I wrote the letter, I've been thanked by regulators. This information was brought to me by state regulators concerned about the release of this data. And walking around at the Meet the Regulator, I had more than 5 states thank me for the letter. I think in many ways, most of our positions on this are aligned and that we need to find a way to make this work. And I'm not upset with the states. I'm upset that we've allowed it to be this much of a challenge continuously over time. This is now my 12th or 13th, meeting, and it's still out there. What do we do moving forward? How do we make this work? And I wanted to invite, I know, because one of the people I reached out to after I got the information, MBA being first, I reached out, talked to Rich, talked to Hayden, and talked to a few people on the IAC. Certainly invite them to have context or provide some other clarity to that as well.
If I could address it just for a moment.
Yes, and then I'd like to let Margaret speak as well from CSBS perspective with regard to the SAFE Act.
So as chairperson of the original MCR work group that came up with the whole thing, our intent was always to have it be CSI, confidential supervisory information. The fact that that FAQ is on the page that says it would not be released, that's the main tangible evidence that I can show you that that's what we intended at the beginning. It's been there forever. If you go back and review minutes or recordings of prior Ombudsman's meetings, you'll hear Deb Bortner saying this information will never be released. You'll hear me saying it. This is one of the ways that we sold it to the industry. So we always intended for it to be CSI. We had a conversation on the MCR subcommittee, and everyone on the subcommittee supports this being CSI. I won't go into the conversation, but it needs to be CSI. It's the only way the system's really going to work. We're not banks. Banks have been uniform since 1933 or so, since they created the entire system for the banks. We think this should be treated a little bit differently. We're still a little bit nascent. We're still changing. Once it gets gelled and it's long-term, decisions can be reviewed at that point. But right now, this still needs to be CSI. I support coming up with something akin to what the banks produce as a UBPR. And so aggregate information for all companies, but not individual information for a company.
Thanks, Rich. If I can, I'm going to pass it to Margaret to speak with regard to the SAFE Act, what it does and does not do, and CSBS's perspective on this. And then I want to allow a couple of states to respond, Massachusetts, Charlie, and Cindy Began with, Charlie with Washington and Cindy Began with Massachusetts. So, Margaret.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks to the MBA staff for their work. Thank you, Bob, and Coop. Thank you for the kind words about Buzz. You know, Buzz did invest a tremendous amount of effort with the states and with the industry on these information sharing issues. Buzz and John Ryan both saw that the vision of NMLS and the vision of the state system as a collaborative system, that information sharing was one of the foundations of that. You know, we have many attorneys in the room, so I'm not going to read you the provisions of the SAFE Act, but I do think it's important to remember that the concept of the SAFE Act is that it itself, and maybe this is for those who haven't been on the journey as long as some of the people in the room have. The concept of the SAFE Act is that information going into the system from states carries with it the privilege, confidentiality protections of the state that originated that information. So the NMLS itself does not create a new level of protection or confidentiality, but the way that the SAFE Act was written, we ensured that the state protections of that information carry with that data. It travels with the data is how I think of it as it's used in the system. The other key piece of that, recognizing that there are differences among the states in terms of how information and data is protected, is that the SAFE Act provides that for data that is sourced from multiple states, the level of confidentiality that is the highest is what applies. And you all know that there is a wide range of how this is addressed at the states, and this was the way to ensure that all of the states were comfortable that their own laws protecting their data, because the data is the state's data, would continue to apply, because in some states there are penalties for disclosing, and we know that in other states there are penalties for not disclosing, and we're trying to address that. Excuse me. So kind of foundationally, that's how the SAFE Act addresses this. This is an issue that we appreciate, again, the industry and Bob raising this. I think there's been a really robust discussion. Individual states are thinking about this, which you'll hear from some of our members. We are also looking kind of structurally at areas where, through something like the terms of use, we can reinforce wherever the individual state decisions get to try to address this this challenge.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Charlie. I'll pass it over to you from the state of Washington.
Sure. Well, I would just start by saying that I chaired the Information Sharing Task Force at the time Buzz was on it, supporting it. And I think it was all kind of started in part because of Washington. Washington has very open records laws. It's very difficult to make anything exempt from production in the state of Washington. So when someone comes to Washington State and says, we want your records, we have to find an exemption, otherwise we have to produce them. So it's not enough for another state or CSBS to say, we deem them confidential. That's not going to win the day. What will win the day is if there's another exemption in our state law, and we have about 100 exemptions in our state law, or an exemption at the federal level. that we can apply. Now, that the SAFE Act exemption that you mentioned, Bob, and that Margaret went over, you really need to look at that without a broad brush, because it's not as broad as you would believe. So this thought that the privilege continues that's provided under federal or state law, what that really means is if information's submitted to, for example, Georgia, which has a very strict confidentiality provision, that privilege remains. Pulling it from Georgia, and then if we in Washington access that document, it is protected. We can use the SAFE Act exemption. If there's a sole actor or sole licensee in Washington State, and the information submitted to Washington State directly, and they're not licensed in any other state, we don't have the SAFE Act exemption, because the underlying Washington State law doesn't say that those documents are exempt. So we run into the situation where we can only apply the SAFE Act exemption if it's a multi-state actor. And for years, we treated all licensing information under this arrangement, but the call report was used primarily by our office for examination purposes. Our underlying law, while for MSBs there's strict confidentiality, we can't produce any documents. In mortgage, that's not the case, and we've tried to tighten that up, and it's very challenging to get our law changed. So we don't have an underlying state exemption in mortgage. But one thing that has come out of the Information Sharing Task Force is it's kind of evolving regulation, where now we're starting to conduct exams and put information into the state examination system. We're pulling information from the call report, and we're taking a different look at this. We've had just numerous lawyers look at this. We've consulted with our Assistant Attorney General. We read the MBA letter. We're going to change our process. So on mortgage call reports, we're going to look to see, are they a multi-state player? And if they are, do some of those states have a restrictive law? If they do, we'll exempt the call report going forward. So we can make that adjustment. And so I think I've said, so kind of the punchline here is, yes, we'll make a change. We heard you. We read your letter. What I would say, just on reflecting on this issue, is that this is a complex issue. It's unique to the state of Washington and maybe a few other states, okay? CSBS may want to change this. They can't. They can't change Washington law. They can develop policy and the comments around disclosures and what it means. Are call reports disclosable? Yeah, I think there's some things that can be done there. But with a unique Washington issue, I would encourage those that are concerned about issues like this, call me directly. I read the memo. I changed our policy. And so I think that's why we're meeting here, is that it's not just a connection with CSBS. You can call the commissioner and raise an issue directly too, if it's really important to the organization.
Thank you, Charlie. I'd also like to give Cindy Began a chance to speak on behalf of Massachusetts.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. So Coop mentioned Tom Brennan, our former chief director. So I have to, I'm here with my colleague Corey Burrows, who was our licensing manager. So Corey and I, we are residents of Massachusetts. However, we do not possess this sort of unique local charm that Tom has in his Boston accent. And I know all of you are missing Tom and missing that strong Boston accent. So, but we do hear from Tom from time to time. He's doing well, so appreciate that. So, similar to, what's sort of happened in the state of Washington. Charlie says that, they're looking at this, they're considering it, there's a lot of thought going into it. Same thing in Massachusetts. We did, several years back, we did release some mortgage call report data, company-level data, in response to an academic paper request. We did this under an analysis of the Commonwealth's public records law, and this was done looking at a mandated annual reporting requirement. So the data released actually goes back, it was from the year 2018. Since that time, subsequent to that time frame, we started taking a look at this. This was several years back now. And looking at our state law, looking at our confidentiality law in the Commonwealth, figuring out where the exemptions lie, and we have made a determination that our confidential protection, if you will, does apply to the mortgage call report data. So this would be for Massachusetts specific. And then, as Charlie mentioned, we would take a similar position to Washington on the shared data that the most restrictive provisions in the state would apply. So at this, that's our position at this time. This 2018 data was released. It is out there. We have not released any data subsequent to that time frame. And this would be our current position going forward. It does get very complicated when we receive requests like this. States, we do have these public records law. This is a reality for the states. All of us that work in state government and federal government, you need to deal with these requests coming in. We deal with them on a case-by-case basis. We look at the type of data that's being requested. We look at what our public records law says, what our confidentiality provisions protect, what are our exemptions, and really work through this. But in this case, we have read your comments, but even prior to that, we had actually made a determination and reconsidered our position on this. So,
Thank you, Cindy.
thank you.
Coop?
Yeah, so Bob asked a good question. What can we do? Alicia made some suggestions. First, clean up the FAQs. But I think sort of structurally, and all due respect, Charlie, I do think there's a role for your associations to play in this going forward. I think the first step is identifying in which states these permeable membranes exist to access this information. Until I heard of this a couple of months ago, I didn't know that this sort of access existed in some states. I don't know what the scope of that is. I think it should be something that CSBS reviews and releases. Secondly, some kind of statement of policy that says that this should be treated as confidential supervisory information, because if I have to go to your legislature, boy, is that going to be a powerful tool. And it should come from regulators saying we need this in order to conduct our prudential roles for these institutions that we license. And I would also say that there is this other conversation which is mostly staff to staff, but MBA has been for a number of years been trying to get access to the agency's mortgage bankers financial reporting form, the MBFRF, for the state community. And we're a member of the consortium, and we're trying to leverage that to pursue that access for your community. And if there's a leaky ship here, I don't think that conversation's going anywhere. I've been on at least one of those calls with Ginny May, and they're very curious about what information sharing would be, and I'm sure CSBS has had their conversations, but I think there's some concern, and I just don't think it's going to get a lot of traction if this is not addressed in a more systemic way. Anyway, my thoughts.
Thank you.
So,
Bob?
a couple quick, just real follow-ups. So certainly appreciate that Alicia's suggestion that the FAQ page should be updated. But the other information I read is directly off the information sharing page on the NMLS Resource Center. And I would tell you from reading it, I don't read the nuance in there that a simple reading of what's posted, that this may be released, it could be released, or whatever. So I would suggest some update to that as well. Charlie, I think I took you to say that no other state data was released based on conversations I had yesterday and today. Other states sounds like they believe that some of their state data was released as part of some of these corrections, so I don't know if that's true. And then third would just be quick. I appreciate that CSBS has an information sharing task force on this, so it does show that it is, you know, imperative to the system as well. And unfortunate that, you know, it takes until this point that we get action and change by a couple of states other than taking a look at it. We've pushed it to the edge where we've got it to move forward, so.
Thank you, Bob. Let's go to the mic for a couple questions. Is it related to this current topic? Okay, Jed, go ahead.
Hi, Jed again from Warwick. When I was a state regulator, and Charlie, I know we worked on these issues, I think what's clear here, and something we forget, is that this is a multi-tenant system, and I think you recognize that. There's shared information, and so understanding what is shared information, that should be clear. I always interpret it, if Maryland requires something and it's labeled Maryland on the document, that would be Maryland only, and only the privileges for Maryland would extend to that document. I think some governance around this so that people understand if they're giving shared information where they're leveraging like MU1 or something where we assume that it's multi-state, that's multi-state where we are sharing, we can leverage the protections of the most restrictive state that was shown in the SAFE Act. That's just something to think through. It sounds like you recognize that. I just think some clarity around the rules of what's a state specific, meaning only the privilege there applies, or something that we're leveraging shared information, which is recognized as a concept in the SAFE Act and on the system. Some greater rules around that would be helpful.
Thank you. Hayden.
Hi, I'm Hayden Riches with Bradley. Really appreciate all the eloquent comments that have been made on this subject. One of the things that I do in representing clients throughout the financial services industry is I have to work with control persons who are new to the NMLS and very cautious about including personal information in the NMLS. There are some states that even require the uploading of personal financial statements in the system now. I've been to every single one of the NMLS user conferences. They're always a privilege. This particular topic has caused me concern over the last few months since I became aware of it. And there's a kind of elephant in the room question that I'm going to ask, and I hope the answer is a foregone conclusion. We're speaking about the public release through FOIA of mortgage call report data. Has there been any other information released? And do I have to report back to, for example, control persons that their individual information is subject to a FOIA request? I presume that there is no possibility that that information would be FOIAble, but in the same sense, until I learned of these disclosures a few months ago, I never thought the mortgage call report information was FOIAble. So I hope that CSBS or others can provide me with that assurance.
So that's a question that's state by state. If any state here is willing to share a bit about your open record law and exemptions, like Charlie alluded to, 100, right? In Kansas, no. PII, that's pretty broad. We get to determine that case by case, but we have to make the determination on every request, as Charlie said. Any other state that wants to address that, or folks from CSBS can as well, but again, it's a question for each state.
Well, I know in Texas, the information on mortgage call report is confidential, so we're not going to disclose it. There are numerous requests for that information, but we won't share information unless it's really available on the MLS access page. So if people will ask for the MU1 information, but we'll exclude everything that's not on consumer access. And so, but we do have to make a request to the Attorney General, because I know that we do receive a lot of requests, or at least recently received a lot of requests from professors who want to get the information. And I know they've been quite insistent that they're forcing us to go to the Attorney General's office to get that request, that it is confidential. And they certainly have been supportive of us in the Attorney General's office that it is confidential, but that's what we would do in Texas.
In Georgia, all of our documents are confidential and not subject to disclosure, so you're good.
If I may, if there is any state that wants to speak privately and won't keep that information confidential, it would be helpful to understand that so appropriate engagement can happen. Again, my presumption has been the personal information for these individuals is always confidential. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Hayden. Welcome.
Will Hardy, California, QCP Systems. I'm bringing up a topic relating to the mortgage call report. And before I sort of give you some pricks about your heart, I want to thank Rich Cortez, the regulator there in Connecticut. I know that he is retiring in the coming months, and I just want to say personally to Rich, before this audience, I appreciate you. I thank you for the work and help that you've given me over the years relating some serious questions regarding the ins and outs of the mortgage call report. So I appreciate you. I want to prick your heart on a couple of things, and I think Josh brought that up earlier as it relates to reporting and so forth. And that is, I want you to consider extending the deadline or the due date from 45 to 60 days. Because I think within that 15-day period, and you all know, those that are dealing with mortgage call reports, that data is a big issue. Brokers don't get the data correct. They have data. I still have clients that have not reported their fourth quarter data. And yesterday was the due date. What do I do? Well, the other issue is if you don't report something, there's a deficiency against your license. Now, the period of November through December 31st of renewals, if you got deficiencies, there are issues about renewals, and some states are very tough about that. So my concern is that maybe you would consider taking away the element of the deficiency if it is not filed within the 45 days. And that if you give an extension to a client or broker for 30 days, then if they don't provide you with a corrected or an amended mortgage call report, then you issue the deficiency, but not at the due date. Something to think about. And the other issue is, I just want to thank Washington for the extension of the first quarter coming up. And I would just encourage all of the regulators here to consider the same opportunity. Because there are going to be people that have no clue. And listen to me, I've been doing mortgage call reports from day one. They're not going to have no clue, because I've got clients even today that don't even realize that there is a financial condition report that's required. And if they are reporting, they're reporting on loans that close, not the loans that are at. So just something to think about. And the final thought is, I would encourage the CSBS and the Mortgage Call Working Group to consider industry. Bring in an element of the industry that can help you come to these tough questions, where there are tough answers. And trust me, it is a tough situation because everybody, every state is different in terms of how they deal with the mortgage call report. And I appreciate those states that work with us and given extensions, the opportunity, because the brokers are not giving us good data to do a perfect call report. So my thought is, bring in some industry, bring in some of the industry people that are out there dealing with that, even the companies that are large and are small having to deal with mortgage call reports and that are in multiple states. So just a few things to think about.
Thank you so
in
much for
this
the
current
comments.
report.
Thank you very much. All right, we are running out of time, and we have one more person, and we'll be able to wrap up after you.
Stacy Brigham, Mayor Brown. I will try to keep it brief. Going back to the confidentiality issue, this is something that we have raised for years, and I would just like the regulators to keep in mind that for the sake of expediency or because it's the only system of record, more and more regulators are asking us to upload documentation that is very proprietary, especially, as an example, transactions. We're asked to upload purchase agreements for private companies. That type of information should not be accessible to states that have these incredibly broad open records laws. So I just would encourage the regulators to think about what documentation you're asking them to upload and reasons why the client may or the licensee may be reluctant. The same is true with financial statements. We are running into more and more difficulty obtaining that information, uploading it. Consider password protected documents. If it's something unique to your state, might be a solution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, and I appreciate all the conversation. Unfortunately, we are at the noon hour, and we have a lot of work to do, as always, a lot of things to think about. But I want to thank everybody that sat up here and supported me, and thank you for the topic presenters. Thank you for all in the room for your attention and questions. So with that, I would like to just reiterate, if you have any questions or things that we couldn't discuss, you can always reach out to the Ombudsman email at ombudsman@csbs.org. And then I would like to welcome you to participate in the next meeting. And thank you so much for your attendance today.